I'm Jordan Hatfield. This is Faster Film Critic. Today on the show, we discuss Juror number 2 with Kolter and Chase Fugel. Juror number 2 is a courtroom thriller starring Nicholas Hoult, Toni Collette, J.K. Simmons. It's directed by Clint Eastwood. That's right. The dude's like 109 years old, I swear. Rumor is he died back in 2017, but the Grim Reaper hasn't had the courage to tell him yet. Get in. We're going cinephiling. What's up, guys? How you guys doing today?
Shots fired at Clint Eastwood.
Dude, I got nothing but mad respect for Clint Eastwood.
Oh, dude, yeah. Dude was 94 when he made this movie, which might be his last or not.
He turned 80 years old 15 years ago. 80?
Yeah.
That's not young. That's not a spring chicken. He has directed 10 films since turning 80.
Wow. Yeah. That's nuts.
I didn't realize until just this episode, but the dude has directed like 45 films.
Yeah.
I mean, Clint Eastwood is a legend.
Yeah, he is.
What do you guys think about Warner Brothers doing Clint Eastwood dirty on this film?
Yeah. I know this movie was originally supposed to go to streaming.
I think originally it was supposed to go to streaming, but it got some very positive feedback early on.
Right.
So I think at that point, the expectation was it was going to go wide, but they didn't. They only released it in 35 theaters.
I didn't know it was that little.
There were reports that Clint Eastwood was unhappy with this. That the production, of course, production team was unhappy with this. This is Clint Eastwood, most likely, Clint Eastwood's final film.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's possible he surprises us all and does another one, but he's saying that this is probably his last film. And, man, for such a legend like Clint Eastwood, to take his final film and just, like, dump it on some streaming platform or get some wussy 35 theater release feels a little disrespectful in my opinion. I think he deserves a little more than that.
Yeah. Does this movie deserve more than that, though?
Well, we'll get into that. What'd you guys think of Juror number 2?
This is definitely not the kind of movie that implements the same kind of clever character development that Eastwood is known for in his prior work. I was largely unsatisfied and disappointed with this one.
What was your biggest reason for being disappointed in this film?
I think it had an unsatisfying ending. There wasn't really any evidence of a directing flair from Eastwood. I think there was some pretty poor writing. I think that the character motivations are largely absent. I don't think it did not dig into the concept of like the fallibility of the justice system. It hints here, it kind of dips its toe into stuff there, and then just a lot of unbelievable moments, man. The question I was going to ask you guys, have either of you ever served on jury duty before?
I have not.
I've been summoned a couple times, and then like the day before it's canceled, so I don't end up going.
Lucky dog.
Have you ever served, Kolter?
Yeah, I've been summoned a number of times and served on a case from beginning to end. And
a big case, what was happening? Tell me what was happening in this case.
So it was a DUI case where a young guy this is such a strange, convoluted story, but he basically got stopped while stopped in his vehicle. And there was an open container in his vehicle, and he had a BAC level, and his claim was that he had been parked and he was drinking kind of by himself in a vehicle, wasn't driving. But there was a lot of evidence and common sense that pointed to something else.
Was the vehicle turned on or was the vehicle turned off?
It was off. He was in the back seat. It's a great question. Oh. So he was in an unincorporated area, which made it kind of the sheriff's responsibility to approach. A neighbor along the street in which he was parked had contacted the police about this guy. But the state side of it kind of screwed it up. When the police officer testified, he was kind of this gruff dude who was really abrupt and kind of gave this air that he didn't want to be there. Whereas the defense side made a strong case that, hey, it's your guys' burden to essentially convince the jury that this guy had been doing what the state had claimed he was doing, and they didn't do a good enough job. So a couple of things that kind of stood out to me about this movie. When you serve on jury duty, the judge, every judge that I've been involved with, both male and female, have been they're very kind. They're very respectful. They're very jovial to the jurors. The judge in this movie is kind of depicted as, snarky. She's kind of a butthole sometimes. There's no real reason for her to be acting the way that she is. They do question you. They do ask you about your prior professions or whether you have any kind of biases that may affect your judgment in a given scenario. But they're not like, hey, so Mr. Greenfield, I heard you like to run around with your pants off at the city park, and you think that's going to affect your judgment on this case? So there was a lot of unbelievable factors about this movie. When we got to the point where we were deliberating as a jury in the jury room, there wasn't these quarrels. It was all very measured and respectful. And maybe that's not indicative of every single deliberation, but in this movie, the jurors get in there and they've got these petty quarrels with each other that are unwarranted. The writing was subpar. I didn't believe watching this that it just wasn't very well thought out. Like the character motivations didn't make any sense. There was just conflict for the sake of conflict, and it just didn't. The themes of this movie, the main character in juror number 2, Justin, is essentially selected to be a juror in a murder case in which he himself may have been the cause of the murder. Justin as a character doesn't seem to be impacted by his actions in a way that garners any kind or any sense of guilt or even sympathy. So much of this movie didn't work. It was trying to go for this like almost Hitchcockian style film, but it doesn't deliver on any of those things, and it just falls apart.
So I think on its face, the premise of this film is pretty absurd. The idea that there's someone involved in an accident that results in the death of an individual, that person ends up in the jury for the trial of the individual accused of murdering this individual. I mean, that's pretty absurd. However, it's a movie, and I can forgive that. And there's a lot in the film that you're referring to about the judge being a jerk. I can kind of look past that too. But I absolutely agree, Kolter. There are two things I cannot look past. Number one, I never saw Justin Kemp squirm.
Right.
He is put in this very difficult, psychologically stressful, and terrifying position in that, on one hand, he knows he is guilty of vehicular manslaughter. Right. And then he left the scene of the accident. And he's looking at this James Scythe and has the ability to put an innocent man in prison for life to protect himself.
Right.
On the other hand, he's an innocent person too. I mean, he did not intend to hurt anybody. This was an accident.
Sure.
I'm not saying that there aren't consequences to accidents, but this was an accident. He did nothing intentional. It was just bad timing. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong conditions. Something tragic happened. But because of the way it all unfolded, if he is caught, he goes to prison. And so he's in this extremely difficult position. And I think this is a fascinating situation to explore.
Yeah, it could have been.
Let's sit with Justin through this decision and let's watch him.
The psychological.
Squirm. Yeah, let's watch him struggle with this. For example, imagine the film plays out differently. Imagine that Justin goes back to the jury room for the first time. And everyone on the jury, at least most people on the jury, are either undecided or leaning innocent.
Right.
And he's realizing, oh my gosh, if this guy gets away, they're going to open up a new investigation. I could lose everything. I'm going to persuade the jury that he's guilty. And then he starts persuading the jury that he's guilty, and maybe he starts convincing them. And all of a sudden, when he realizes, oh my goodness, this jury is going to vote guilty and an innocent man's going to go to prison, now the psychological weight of that hits him, and he starts thinking, I can't go through with this. I've got to now push them innocent. That struggle I wanted to see, because that is fascinating. That would be such an interesting story. And there's none of that struggle. I agree with you there, Kolter, 100%.
The movie that you just described sounds far more compelling than what we watched, and I'd like to see that movie, please.
I'll get to work on the script.
Yeah, I'll just whip it out.
And my second criticism about this movie, again, Kolter, you griped about this earlier, and I absolutely agree with you, was the side characters. Man, they are one-dimensional and stupid. The writing around the side characters is so bad. Let me throw out a couple examples that really just took me out of the movie. I'm known to be a little bit critical. I have high expectations for cinema. I know what filmmakers are capable of, and I expect every filmmaker to give it their all, right? So I have high expectations. One of these events, or two of these writing errors, or three of these narrative problems could be forgiven. But when there's so many, it's just, I'm constantly saying, that's so stupid, and I'm reminded I'm in a movie. Number one, the fight in the bar between James Synth and his girlfriend.
Yeah.
You hear just a bit of it.
Sure.
And what they're fighting about, she says, I want you to say I love you too. And he says, read between the lines, I said yeah. And they're like fighting about that, like to the point that it's physical and he's throwing glasses. Like she's just saying, I want you to say I love you. And he's like, blah, smashing glasses and throwing
Right.
around. Like,
Yeah.
it's just so silly. Give them something to fight about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it explains later. He's like, I didn't want to move into it that time. I was being dumb. I need something more there, right? Again, small, but it's one of these mini small things.
Yeah.
Number 2, they go back in the jury room for the first time. And most people in the jury room was like, guilty, guilty, guilty. And nobody really is taking serious the gravity of the situation. Like, nobody.
Right.
One of the most annoying things to me is they go around the room and everyone's like, guilty, guilty, guilty. And the one guy's like, yeah, guilty's cool. And they keep going around, guilty, guilty. And then they get to Justin Kim's character, and he's like, I'm not so sure. I can't say guilty.
Yeah.
And a woman approaches him, and she's like, what's the problem? And he's like, this is somebody's life we're talking about. Like, we should take some time and think about this.
Yeah.
And she like shakes her head in disgust and is like, this is such a joke.
Right.
I'm just like, who would act like that? And again, in this first moment in the jury room, Justin Kemp is like, does anyone have the slightest doubt? And that same woman is like, and she just kind of trails off. And he's like, if you're going to send this man to prison for the rest of his life, you have to be sure. And she's like, the only thing I'm sure about is I got to get home to my 3 kids.
Right.
Nobody is taking this seriously. It's all there just for movie.
Yeah. The most realistic part about it was people trying to get out of jury duty in that one scene, because that is a thing, man. Everybody stands up. You know what the shame of that is to me? I've seen that happen now 3 or 4 occasions. Every time I've been summoned, everybody wants to stand up and give their excuses. I've got super bad hemorrhoids. I can't sit here for, 4 weeks and do this. Everybody's got an excuse. That was the only part of the movie that was like.
Was that your excuse?
Maybe. No, I didn't make an excuse.
He's got hemorrhoids. It's not an excuse.
I've always got those,
problem
man.
for him.
Yeah.
I've wondered why you've never sat down when we do these episodes, Kolter. I don't know why you're always standing.
Well, I do, but it's on a nice inflatable donut. But dude, the process itself is fascinating. Like, it's actually cool. As an American, you shouldn't. It's part of our duty, man. It's like, and it's just it's a cool experience. Like, it's fun to see how these things proceed in a courtroom, and very few, if any, movies get it right. It's one of those things that's so easily dramatized into an entertainment form that I get that it's great fodder for that, but the process in itself is actually very interesting too. I mean, we've probably all seen televised court cases on TV, and it's a lot drier and it's a lot more procedural and more technical, but it's kind of like they didn't even bother. Man, I don't think there was really a single character that I actually cared about in this movie, up to and including Justin Camp. I mean, he didn't really seem to care much about what he did.
Yeah, I couldn't figure him out. In that first scene where they're all grouped up together and trying to come to a verdict, and all of them say guilty except for him, I couldn't believe he was willing to go on this monologue about how this guy might be innocent in front of the 10 people while also trying to preserve himself.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate. I think that's trying to portray he knows that James Synth is innocent and he doesn't want to send him to jail. His hope is that he can get a verdict of innocent. And so he's pushing the jury to go innocent so that he wins and James wins.
I would have said innocent, and that would have been all I would have done. I would have known from the start. I couldn't convince these 10 people.
Well, these 10 people were
morons.
Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
And not only that, there's the witness, the old man. He comes out on the stand and he's like, guilty.
Like, no, I know.
That's the man I saw. It is him without question. And then later, Toni Collette's character visits him in his house and he's like, it just felt so good to be important. And by the way, did he really kill her?
Right. This is not how real people operate.
Huge writing problems just throughout the film. I've pointed to Justin Kemp's weaknesses relative to the moral struggle and the anguish that he faces through the psychologically traumatic decision. That could have been developed and portrayed so much stronger. But I recognize I've got the highest of expectations, and so to some degree, I'm willing to give that a pass. But it is the side characters, the ridiculous narratives and statements and stereotypes and ridiculous tropes that really took me out of this film. It's the embarrassing writing around the supporting characters that I just can't overlook. I just can't forgive that.
It just doesn't work.
I want to sit in the seat of someone who liked this film. If you can forgive that stuff, if you can kind of look past some of these weaker writing elements in the side characters, there's a lot to like in this film.
Sure.
The premise is interesting.
It is.
No more discussion than that. It's interesting. It is. Next subject.
Yeah, sure. I would still struggle, even if I were of the mindset to just kind of be more accepting about the ending of this. It's still so weird to me. Like, there's a sense of arrogance in Justin. It's like he wants to have his cake and eat it too. And he's at the end of the movie, there's this weird confrontation between the prosecutor and Justin. They're sitting on this bench. He's kind of half-assedly admitting to her what happened and that he may be responsible, but at the same time excusing himself because he's a good guy. Just let it go. I've got a baby at home. And I'm just like, what in the hell was this movie really trying to say?
That scene was so unrealistic. I could hardly watch. It was crazy.
So this is an impossible question to ask, and so maybe it's better left as a rhetorical question. But what would you do? Would you send an ex-gang member who is trying to turn his life around to prison for something you did? Or would you let him off the hook and spend the rest of your life, or 15 years of your life, in prison for something that was innocent and a total accident?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you answer that question, let's be honest. But this movie attempts to explore that. It could have done a much better job exploring that. We all agree, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But again, I think that idea was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And as I'm watching the film, I'm thinking, what would I do in this situation? And
that's what makes it all the more disappointing.
And let me tell you what I would do. I would have the moral strength and courage to stand up and tell the judge it was me, and then I would face my punishment like a man. You know what I mean? Like, no way. Like, no way I'm going to do that. Like, that would be so hard.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that would want to, but I've got kids. And this was an accident. I don't deserve to go to prison for 15 years. Like, there's no way I'm going to be like, oh, judge, it was me. This was all a big misunderstanding. But on the flip side, there is no way I could live with myself knowing that an innocent man was spending even a moment behind bars for something that I had done.
Yes.
Wow, what a tough spot to be in. I don't know how you handle that as a person. Even as a moral, honest person. Like,
yeah, sure.
Wow, the weight of that is heavy.
Yeah. Everybody has a sense of self-preservation, right? I mean, it's baked into kind of who we are as people. But yeah, man, you take somebody who's a known murderer, just scum of the earth kind of person, and all of a sudden it becomes easier in your head to rationalize or warrant that, better him than me. This is the one mistake I've made in my life versus this person's decisions have led to other people being hurt, killed, whatever. I can live with this, but you would still have to live the rest of your life knowing that you took somebody's life, intentional or not. And that can be a punishment, unto itself.
Oh my goodness, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
That's the movie I want to see right there.
Yeah. I mean, here we go, right? This is such a fascinating question. Like, I can't imagine destroying my life and the lives of my family members, voluntarily standing up and taking responsibility for something that was really a complete unintentional accident where you could really say I was innocent. I hit the deer. I got out. I looked around. I didn't see anything. I didn't see a sign of anything. I didn't see anything. What does anyone do when they hit a deer and the deer scampers off? Like, they drive away. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Yeah. What a fascinating question. You said that you didn't like the end. I actually did like the end.
Really?
The end was my favorite part of the movie.
Like the very end or the conversation leading up to the end?
So I didn't like the fact that it did not portray Justin Kemp's thought process when changing his vote from innocent to guilty. Through the whole film, he's saying James Synth is innocent, 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 and then all of a sudden just hard cut to the verdict, to the judge, and they're like guilty, which makes it apparent that Justin switched. There was nothing there. I wanted to see that change in him. Yeah. From a psychological standpoint, and I didn't. And so that was a huge error.
There was never even a hint of that throughout the rest of the movie.
But then after that, they leave the courtroom, and Faith Kilbrew, the prosecuting attorney, at that point is put together that Justin Kemp is involved in this. And she approaches him, and she's making subtle hints that she knows. And he's making subtle threats back, like, this is going to cost you your position as DA, and you're going to ruin my life. And this was nothing but an innocent mistake. And we've already ruined Jameson's life. Like, this is messy. There's going to be a lot of injustice here if you try and correct this little mistake of yours.
Sure.
I didn't mind that. And then he goes home and you think the movie's going to end and knock, knock, knock. Door opens and she's standing there and then boom, it goes to credits.
Right.
I thought that ending scene was really cool. That was my favorite part of the whole film.
Now that you mention it, I guess I would think I was focused too much on just, I don't know.
The lunacy of the conversation there at the bench.
Yeah, and the unrealistic aspect of their approach to these characters. So yeah, there is some redemption and kind of at least the implication that he's going to have to answer to justice now, which also implies that the guy blamed for the crime unjustly may be getting justice of his own.
My favorite part about that ending was Toni Collette's character was willing to go through all of this work, go to every car that's had work done on this headlight and everything, really narrow it down. And then she goes to Justin and Allie's house, and Allie's there, his wife. And she's like, yeah, my husband hit a deer down the road. You know, that was it. Just around the time of the murder, but not much else. And she's like, okay. And doesn't decide to do any more research until they're in the courtroom and the guy gets proven guilty. And she looks up Allison Cruson husband on her phone, a quick Google search, and then finds out that he's the one that did it.
Yeah.
That was terrible.
Yeah, dude, it totally contradicts the earlier scene in which the two lawyers are kind of, they're going through their juror scrutinization and kind of ruling people out. And they seem to know everything about their lives at that point. And I'm sure that includes names, addresses, things like that. It's like, I mean, the only other interesting character in this was J.K. Simmons' character. That's when it started to get a little interesting for me. It's like, oh, you've got this former detective on the jury panel. He's starting to kind of question the validity of the investigation. He's starting to do some investigation of his own. I'm like, okay, this is heating up. This shit interesting. And then he's just out of the movie.
Even when his character was revealed to be the cop, I still had mixed feelings. Because near the start, we saw them airing out the dirty laundry, doing background checks on everybody. And then out of nowhere, he pulls out his badge. It's supposed to be this massive reveal. Everybody's shocked.
Yeah, dude, every time I've served on a jury, they have asked me specifically or asked anybody in that room if they've had any law enforcement experience. I've had to say yes because I was in military police in the Air Force. So they, you have to, and then they ask you, do you think that experience is going to in any way cloud your judgment or create any bias towards the defendant in the case? Of which I'd like to, think no. I'm there to be as subjective as possible. That is the point of being a juror. But yeah, they ask all of these things, unless it's wildly different in the state of Georgia, which I highly doubt. So good point, man. It's just, I don't know.
All right. Well, we've been talking about this movie long enough. I want to know exactly where it is you guys fall. Let's go ahead and rate it.
I was really underwhelmed. I think for me, this movie had a great elevator pitch, but then it gets started and everything falls apart. I can't help but give this movie 2 stars.
Dude, I'm right there with you. This movie's a 2. And the reason for that is it's Clint Eastwood. I had a higher degree of expectation from him based on his prior work. It's not particularly well written. The characters are not compelling. They're not interesting. They are confusing and convoluting. Jordan's pitch for this movie was far more interesting. I would have much preferred to see that movie. And unfortunately, I was just really, really disappointed. And it's a 2. Hate to say it.
I'm going to be a little bit more forgiving than you guys. I'm going to give the film a 3. There wasn't a point in the film where I was like, oh my gosh, I want to turn this off. I can't wait for it to end. Like, I was engaged enough that I was able to sit through the movie. Granted, I'm laughing at some things and shaking my head at others. It is far from a perfect film, but we watched it with some neighbors, some really good friends of ours. And we had a good time. No one loved the movie, but we didn't hate it. But if you liked Juror number 2 or you hated Juror number 2, please let us know. We want to hear about it.
If you enjoyed Juror number 2 and love movies about courtroom proceedings, 12 Angry Men is a must-watch. And boy, do they get pantsed. This is an absolute classic 1957 courtroom drama directed by Sidney Lumet, revolving around a group of jurors deliberating a murder trial. It is a brilliantly directed and acted film, compelling and tense. It explores prejudice and confirmation bias and the impact of standing up against groupthink. You owe it to yourself to watch this film.
Thank you for listening to Faster Film Critic, and please tune in next week when we talk Wolfman, directed by Lee Wanell. No question this film's better than The Wolfman from 2010. Man, that film sucked. You can also follow us on Letterboxd, Cinetrack, and Instagram. Email us at fasterfilmcritic@gmail.com. Hit us up with questions, comments, feedback, or review requests, and don't forget to share this episode with your movie-loving friends.